Hello and welcome to What Helen Reads. I'm Helen and today I've got my February reading wrap up for you. So in February I managed to read 15 books. 2 of them were physical books, 1 was an audiobook and the rest of them I read on my Kindle. And overall I had a really good reading month with some really good books, which I'm going to take you through one by one and let you know what they're about, how I rated them and if I recommend them. So the first book I read in February was Jet by Anna Fury, and it's book 2 in the Temple Maze series. And in this one we're following Jet, Renz and Akea. And it's an MMF romance. It's also a paranormal romance. So in book 1 we were introduced to these characters, and essentially there is a group of monsters that have been forcibly imprisoned into a maze, and they've also sort of been tagged and they're forced to hunt and kill different people and creatures each night, and it's for the entertainment of kind of the rich out in the world. Now these packs have been desperately trying to escape for a long time, but there's no way out of the maze. And in book 1 we follow Noir and his partner, who basically end up figuring a way out of the maze. So this book starts where we're just recently out of the maze and Jet is extremely traumatized in terms of what happened to him while he was in the maze, because he was made to provide sexual entertainment for kind of these rich people who have been watching what's going on in the maze, and he's also been forced to take drugs basically to keep his stamina going and make sure that he can perform all evening long. So when he comes out of the maze he's kind of got to go through a drug withdrawal. So first of all he's extremely grumpy and he's finding this really difficult. But also he's had a sexual experience in the maze with our vampire, who is Renz, and so he's basically very interested in Jet and he kind of wants him for himself. In addition to that, we've also met for the first time Akea. Now she was never in the maze, it's someone that they met when they escaped from the maze, but she's somehow integral to the whole storyline. We're not really sure at first and we don't really know what kind of species she is, and she doesn't remember either. And essentially she's got this tattoo on her back, which is basically a magical tattoo that means that she can't remember anything about her past, she doesn't know who she is. And so Jet, Renz and Akea, they kind of go on this road trip together to try and find out what her tattoo is, how she got it, try and uncover some of her memories. And in doing so they kind of go and visit the vampire people. More of the plot is kind of unravelled and it kind of goes from there. So if you're going to read this one, and I highly recommend it, I rated it 4 stars, but it is a dark romance and there's quite a lot of graphic sort of scenes, and also there's lots of like kink and spice in Anna Fury's books, so you want to make sure that you read the trigger warnings before you go into these. But I absolutely love the world. It's very intriguing, it's quite complex and rich, but you definitely need to read book 1, which is Noir, if you're going to go on to read Jet, but I do highly recommend it. So the next book I read is actually my only 5-star read of the month of February, and it was The Auction by Maggie Cole. I guess this is another dark romance, if you like, and in this one we're following Riggs and Blakely, or otherwise known as Pet, because Riggs calls her Pet. This is actually a 2-part book, so there's 2 parts, The Auction and The Vow. This came out at the end of January, and so I kind of like grabbed it as soon as I could because I do love Maggie Cole's books in general, and I grabbed it as soon as I could. I was really intrigued by this. Now I don't normally like duets because I hate the cliffhanger at the end and having to read a second book to kind of get the conclusion to the love story, but I have to say this one had me hooked from the first page and I absolutely loved it. And after I finished it I could not wait to read The Vow. Now fortunately there was only originally 30 days to wait anyway, because Maggie Cole was going to bring it out at the end of February, but she actually brought it forward, and so I ended up reading The Vow in the middle of the month, and I'll come back to that later. But in terms of The Auction, so Riggs is Blakely's father's business partner, and he's recently discovered that her father is stealing money from him and the business and their clients, and they're extremely wealthy and they're kind of into kind of like, you know, mergers and acquisitions and investment and that sort of thing. Now Riggs is really angry by this, and he has kind of put together a plan to kind of bring her father down and make him pay for what he's done. Now he doesn't want to go to the FBI or anything like that, because obviously he doesn't want to ruin the reputation of his business, so his plan very much is to financially ruin her father so that he's got nothing and then take over the business for himself. Now Blakely is actually estranged from her parents because they've been trying to force her into an arranged marriage, and so several years ago she ran away, and she's been kind of like making ends meet by working several jobs, and she's also working at this kind of like strip club, but as a waitress there. So the start of this book is very much where her father's tracked Blakely down. She is kidnapped by her father's goons. On the way, when they're taking her back to her father, they get a flat tire and they have to pull the car over, and it gives her an opportunity to escape, and she escapes. And she runs across the road and straight into this sex club. And of course, because she's come from work and they've captured her at work, she's also scantily dressed. And she walks straight into an auction at this sex club. Because she's trying to get away, she kind of goes along with it and says, yes, 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 I'm here for the auction. And then she finds herself on stage and being bid on. And who should be there but Riggs? And he realises that this is the missing daughter, and he thinks this is brilliant. It's going to basically kill two birds with one stone. He's going to get a sexual partner for a month, because that is what the terms of the auction are, and also he's going to be able to use her to get revenge on her father. But in addition to wanting to get revenge on her father, Riggs is actually really happy with this arrangement, and at first he doesn't realise that she is only at the auction because she was trying to get away from her would-be kidnappers, and she has no idea. She doesn't know about this lifestyle at all. And when she figures it out, she is very nervous to start with, but also she's secretly been attracted to Riggs for a very long time, and she is also thinking this might not be such a bad thing, and she kind of agrees to be his submissive for a month. Now there's some strange rules at the club where because it's an auction and she's agreed to be with him, the sort of clauses in the contract about how she's going to act, and the rules of being the dom and the rules of being the sub. And he has to prove to the club that she can fully submit to him and that they should be together. Otherwise, the club reserves the right to take her away from Riggs and basically put her in accommodation, and Riggs will not be allowed anywhere near her. So as the weeks kind of progress, she's not really coming round to this submissive way of life, and he sort of says to her, like, if you don't submit to me, you can't stay with me, they'll take you away from me, so you've kind of got to make a choice. So I think it's a really interesting sort of storyline, very interesting dynamic. She explores her sexuality and learns what it means to be submissive and whether or not she likes that. And of course Riggs is the ultimate alpha hero, is extremely dominant and possessive, and he wants to completely dominate and own her. And when things start to escalate with her father and their relationship starts to unravel, that's where we sort of head towards a cliffhanger. And in some ways it's obvious in terms of what's going to happen and what the cliffhanger is going to be, but I just thought the whole story was absolutely brilliant. I absolutely felt their sexual chemistry. I really loved these characters. I both hated and loved Riggs in equal measure because he was so frustrating with some of the things that he was doing, but I just couldn't help be attracted to him myself and really kind of like, you know, wanting them to be together. And so when I put the book down, it left me with all the feels. I was absolutely addicted to this book, and when the cliffhanger happened, I knew it was coming, but I was like, I could not believe that is where it ended. And at first I was fairly distraught. I was going to have to wait another month to get the sequel. So like I say, highly recommended and 5 stars from me. Then the next book I read was Plain Dirty by Bianca Cole, and this is book 4 in her Syndicate Academy series. So I normally love Bianca Cole. She writes some really good mafia romances, and usually there's lots of spice in them. If anything, they're bordering on sort of erotic romance rather than, you know, being character or plot driven. They're very much driven by the sexual scenes in a lot of cases, and there's quite a lot of kink in them normally as well. Now this one is a mafia romance, but it's also kind of an age gap. There's a teacher-student relationship, so it's very much kind of forbidden. And in this one we're following Archer and Adriana. So this is kind of like it's kind of like a series with the next generation in it. So the kids of the mafia couples that we've seen in other series end up at this syndicate academy where they're very much there to be trained and learn how to be, you know, mafia leaders, if you like. Now one of the teachers, who is Archer, he's kind of like the equivalent of the PE teacher. He teaches them how to fight. Now Archer's got a reputation at the school that every year he basically sweet talks one of the senior girls, and he gets his sights set on one of them, and then they become his woman for the year. And in Adriana's final year at school, he very much sets his sights on Adriana, but she pushes him away, and it's like, she's a virgin and is trying to maintain her virginity so that when she gets her arranged marriage, she is, you know, completely innocent in that regard. But two, she doesn't want to be another notch on his bedpost, and so she very, very much pushes him away and tries to you know, deflect his advances. But he becomes obsessed with her. In order to get what he wants, he uncovers some dirt on her and her family and essentially blackmails her into being with him for the year. So like I said before, I absolutely love Bianca Cole, and I love some of her main mafia series. My favourite is the Boston Mafia series, but I felt throughout the Syndicate Academy, I think her writing has actually not been as strong as in some of her other series. I rated this one 3 stars, which for me isn't still a bad rating. It still meant I liked it, but it just lacked something that some of her other books have. And it was interesting because at the end of the book there is kind of like an author's note, and she does talk about the fact that she struggled with the series overall creatively. She didn't really know where to take it, and as a result that is going to be the last book in the series for the time being. So she hasn't said that she's never going to revisit it, but I think she's kind of come to the end of the ideas in terms of what's going on with that series. And I know she's bringing out a new book in May, which I'm really looking forward to, and it looks to be like a fairy tale retelling but also still set in the mafia world. Then after that I read Where Violets Bloom by Daisy Jane, and this is book 1 in the Men of Paradise series. And I did actually, and there's 3 books in the series, and I did actually end up reading books 1, 2 and 3 back to back. The first one though is definitely much darker than the others. I rated this one 4 stars and I really enjoyed it. And in this one we're following Donovan, or Van as he's known to his friends, and Violet. Now Van is a police officer. I know some people won't like this book because it's basically an abuse of power, because he is a police officer. However, I just think the whole book was really interesting. I really enjoyed it, and I like the way it was written. Van is a very interesting character. He becomes very obsessed and possessive about certain things, and prior to meeting the heroine Violet, he has some unusual he's kind of got an unusual hobby. He likes to scare people, and the reason he does this psychologically is because he looks at people and thinks that they don't appreciate how good their life is, and therefore what he tries to do is scare people. For example, he'll pretend to hold them at knife point. He might attempt to rob them, but he always gives them that. So if he's robbed a wallet or something, he always kind of like ends up giving it back. But he wants to put somebody into a position where they're scared and kind of like realise that it's a trigger for realising how good their life is and not to take it for granted, which is a bit of a backwards way of thinking, but when you kind of get into the mind of this main hero, it kind of makes sense. And then one day he happens to see Violet in the park, and she's being dragged through the park by her father, and he looks at her and immediately knows that she's the one for him. And after that he basically starts to stalk her. So he stalks her for about a year, where he follows her, he watches her, and at one point he even puts cameras into her room so he can watch her as she's sleeping and getting changed and going out to work. Now Violet has got a very bad home life. So she's an adult now and she's a teacher, but she's still living at home, and both her parents and her sister treats her terribly, and in fact her father has started to physically abuse her as well. Now Van realises that something's going on and is not quite right, and when she gets herself into trouble again and he sees her with a black eye, he immediately decides he's going to kidnap her and take her to his house, but with the intention of basically nursing her back to health. And this is where their relationship starts from here, and it's very, very interesting because she finds out straight away that he's been stalking her, but that he's also a police officer, and he doesn't lie to her at all. He wants to be completely honest with her and allows her the space and time to kind of understand what's going on in her head, which I really did enjoy. And it just kind of gets darker from there, and you kind of think to yourself, how can somebody choose to be with him, but equally is so honest, so attentive, so sweet with her, that you can absolutely see why she would be completely devoted to him, fall in love with him, and accept him for who he is. So I really enjoyed this one, gave it 4 stars like I said, and would highly recommend it. So I went straight on to the next one in the series, which is called Stray by Daisy Jane. Now this is obviously book 2 in the Men of Paradise series, and in this one we're following Bran and Elsie. Now Bran is a friend of Van's, and we saw him in book 1, and he owns a gym. Bran is really, really close to his sister, and several years prior to the start of this book, his sister's been attacked in a local bar, and he interjects to try and rescue her, and this big fight breaks out, and in the process he gets an eye injury and ends up becoming blind in one of his eyes. And so now he wears an eye patch, but because of this, he's lost complete confidence in himself and his looks and whether or not a woman will want him. And he's had some terrible blind dates where the women have been absolutely awful, and he's just not been able to get a girlfriend, and he's convinced it's because of his eye. And then that's where we meet Elsie. So Elsie's also been struggling. She has got a mother who seemingly has dementia, or is starting to develop the early signs of dementia, and she's got a young daughter, and so she's a single mum. And she's got this young daughter, so she's trying to make ends meet. She's working at our local gym, not his gym, but a different gym on reception. And she, you know, really struggles to work full time, bring up her daughter and look after her mother. And at the gym, she's got a friend, and we find out that this friend is basically a dominatrix. She is paid by men to dominate them, and this gives her extra cash and also loads of confidence. Now she convinces Elsie that she can earn a bit of money on the side, but also grow in confidence if she also does this extra job. And so there is a bit of a misunderstanding where Bran puts an ad in the paper for a heavy lifting trainer at his gym, and that is code for "I'm looking for a dominatrix to come and dominate me." So he becomes Elsie's first client, and she goes to his gym with the intention of dominating him, and when she gets there, he thinks he's going to be interviewing her for a job. Anyway, he's so taken aback by what's kind of going on, and he's also extremely attracted to Elsie, that he kind of lets the interaction happen, and then she arranges to meet him the following week, and they start this kind of like once a week kind of arrangement where she's going to come and dominate him. And so their relationship kind of like goes from there, and it's very, very, again, Bran is such a sweet hero. He is totally in love with her, and I just absolutely love their chemistry together and the way they are together, and again, I highly recommend, and I also rated this one 4 stars. Then after that, because there's only 3 books in the series, I was gonna write, I'm gonna finish the series, this is really good so far, and I read the final book in the Paradise of Men series, which is called With Force, also by Daisy Jane. Now this is another contemporary romance, and it's a bit of a taboo romance as well, and it involves consensual non-consent. So again, read the trigger warnings on these. In this one we have Christian, who is also known by his friends as Malibu, and Samantha, who is known as Sammy. Sammy is Bran's sister from the previous book, and she's also a nurse. So she's really, really close with Bran, and they're pretty much best friends. Now, in their friendship circle, we've also got Malibu, and he is also a police officer, and he's Van's partner, like his police partner. And so they're a very, very tight-knit group. Now, Malibu and Sammy have known each other for years and years and years, so it's also a brother's best friend. Yeah, so Malibu has absolutely loved Sammy for years, but he's held back because he thinks it's a bit of taboo because it's his best friend's younger sister, but also because he didn't want to ruin the friendship group because they all get on so well as friends, and he didn't want to affect kind of like their friendship dynamic if he was to go out with the sister and then something bad happened, and he didn't want it to all be awkward. But over the years, he's been getting close and close with Sammy, and he is at the stage where he can't hold back anymore, and he needs to basically tell her how he feels. Sammy is attracted to Malibu, but Malibu is very much a looker. He's sort of a bit of a ladies' man, and she doesn't really want to get involved with him. Also, she's harbouring a secret of her own because she has a rape fantasy, and she is embarrassed to kind of like tell him what this is. But of all the people that she knows and all the men that she's been in relationships with, he's the only one that she really trusts in order to be able to share this secret with, but also that he won't take it too far and hurt her. So they do start this relationship, and she asks him to do this, and at first he's really, really horrified because he loves her so much that he can't possibly conceive of doing something like this. So even if she's asking him to do it, he really doesn't want to be the person that's kind of like, you know, sexually assaulting her, even if it's, you know, completely consensual. And so it takes him a little while to come round to it, but he agrees that he's going to give it a go. And of course what happens is, while they're in the middle of one of their scenes, Bran actually comes into the house and sees this, and at first he thinks maybe Malibu is actually attacking her, and then kind of realises that maybe that isn't the case. So it's really, really interesting in terms of her getting the confidence to tell Malibu what she actually wants in the bedroom, and how he comes to terms with that, and how they kind of work through that together and kind of experiment and try different scenes and scenarios, but also what happens when, you know, other people find out about what's going on, because obviously it's a very, very private situation. Again, I really like this. I gave it 4 stars. I would highly recommend it. But then the next one I read was God of Malice by Rina, and I nearly gave this one a 5-star. Another dark romance, and it's also a college romance as well. Now, the hero in this one, Killian, he is a true psychopath, and the heroine is Glyndon. Now, these, again, a bit like Bianca Cole's one, these are kind of like the next generation of mafia heroes we've seen in other Rina Kent's books, and now they're at kind of an academy, like a school. Oh, and I forgot to say, so, and it's the first book in the Legacy of God series. So Killian is a true psychopath, and he's studying medicine, and from an early age he's wanted to kind of cut into animals to see what makes them tick, to see what's inside them. And at the start of this book they meet where Glyndon is actually on a cliff edge, and she's contemplating throwing herself off. She had this friend who basically has recently killed himself in this very place, and she is there wondering why her friend did it, but also should she also do it too. Now, Killian happens to be there, and he kind of rescues her from the cliff edge. But because of that, he sort of offers her a choice. I can let you go and you can fall off the side of the cliff, or you can let me rescue you. But if you let me rescue you, then you're going to have to do me a favour, and the favour is basically giving him a blowjob. He pretty much blackmails her into it. But the way he basically goes about doing that, and how he twists her words, and how he sort of says, well, no, you chose this. And she said, well, I didn't exactly choose it. He went semantics. And so it's really, really interesting, like watching him inside, you know, seeing how he thinks. And what I really liked about this book is that we get both points of view. So we get the point of view from Glyndon's perspective, but also from Killian's perspective. And so you really get a really good look inside the mind of a psychopath, and what he thinks and what he's trying to do. and how he's trying to manipulate Glyndon, but it's all from a very analytical perspective. He kind of like is trying to figure her out, what makes her tick, but through this he becomes very, very possessive and obsessed with her, and very much wants to make her his. And so Glyndon kind of ends up in this situation where he just keeps turning up, she can't really get rid of him, and he's kind of forced to be with him. But ultimately she starts to learn a bit more about him and starts to develop feelings for him too. And so again, it was very, very dark. There was lots of dark themes. Please check the trigger warnings, but I really, really liked this one because it really gave you a really good insight into the mind of a psychopath. So then after that, I got around to reading The Vow, because Maggie Cole, as I said earlier, brought this out earlier, and she brought it out mid-month. And as soon as it was available and I'd finished my previous book, I basically jumped straight on it and continued the story between Blakely and Riggs. Now I don't want to give too much away because you know, once we've got to the turning point and we've got the cliffhanger out of the way, then additional things happens. All I will say is that actually, and I didn't mention it before, but Blakely is a very, very talented musician, and in book one, Riggs gets her a agent and she becomes very successful and gets a song in the charts and is starting to have her own concerts and shows and everything. And at the end of book one, she ends up going and staying with her agent. Now we know the agent is smarmy and slimy, and we don't like him at all, and he's been trying to win her over and push Riggs out of the picture. And so he's very, very pleased that, you know, at the end of book one, that Riggs and Blakely are currently separated. And I just knew that something very, very bad was going to happen with the agent. And that Blakely was going to be really vulnerable in this situation. It wasn't quite as good as the first book for me. I did rate this 4 stars, but again, I'm pretty strict star rater, and so I probably would have given it like 4.5 if I gave half stars. It was still really, really good. Duet as a whole was you know, a 5-star read, but this second book I think was not quite as strong as book one. And the main reason for this is because Riggs started to really irritate me. So yes, he's very, very alpha, yes, he's very possessive and he's extremely dominant and he wants to dominate, but I never really felt that he did enough of a grovel. He didn't ever, I think, fully understand what he'd done wrong or why she left him at the end of book one. And he, rather than admitting what he'd done and saying that he was going to change, and even then, I don't necessarily expect heroes to change, because I do think if they're a dark hero, a dark alpha, possessive hero, then you can't really expect them to change. And sometimes I don't like that when they kind of back down and become someone they're not. But equally, he never really sort of really believed that he'd done anything wrong, and he kind of just ground her down into, and his stance completely all the way through the book was, well, we're going to be together because we're meant to be together and we can't be apart. So you're going to have to get over it, forgive me, and come back to me. And that was kind of his stance, which he didn't really change. So I felt Riggs was really, like I said earlier, in book one, I both hated him and loved him in equal measure. And in book two, I found myself hating him more than loving him. So it was really, really frustrating, I felt. But still, overall, I thought the love story was amazing. The chemistry between them was great. And you know, I did thoroughly enjoy the book, and I enjoyed the ending as well, so I would highly recommend both of those books. So the next one I finished was Consumed by Jessica Prince, and this was my audiobook for the month. So this is book 3 in the Civil Corruption series, and essentially it's a pop star romance or a rock star romance. It's very much enemies to lovers, and they go on a road trip in this close proximity. And in this one we're following Killian and Gina. Now Killian is the bass guitarist in the band, and Gina is their new PA. Now Killian is massively attracted to Gina, and prior to her taking the role as the PA, they'd had one night together, and he's not been able to stop thinking about her ever since. And so he is really, really angry by this situation. His backstory is that he doesn't trust women at all. He's kind of like a once and done kind of guy. He goes through women, you know, every night he's got a new woman, but he never goes back for seconds. And he really just doesn't believe in relationships. He thinks that women are trouble and that they're just gonna take him for a ride, basically. So when he sleeps with Gina, he thinks he's going to get it out of his system, and that he, you know, won't think about her again. But of course, that isn't what happens. It's the best night of his life. He can't get her out of his head. And when she ends up becoming the personal assistant, he is not happy about it. He doesn't want her to go on tour with them. He wants to just try and forget about her and get her out of his head. And the fact that she's so closely, in such close proximity with him on a day-to-day basis, you know, looking after the band, looking after their kind of affairs, he is livid, and he tries to make her life a living hell. He thinks that if he's really, really horrible to her, she'll end up resigning and leaving, and that's what he's trying to do. But Gina has a very sick mother, and she is trying to have to fund her medical care, basically. So when this job to be a PA comes up, and it's much more money, and it gives her the opportunity to save a bit of cash, pay some medical bills, and maybe put her mum in a better facility, she jumps at the chance. And of course, she's so desperate for the money, so desperate to take care of her mum, that she's not going to let Killian ruin it for her, and she's certainly not going to back down and quit the job. So now you have these two characters that are really kind of rubbing up against each other. You know, he's making her life difficult and she's not backing down. But they have such massive chemistry together, and it's great to see how their relationship unfolds, and ultimately they get their happy ever after. So I rated that one 4 stars, and I would highly recommend, but you definitely do need to read these books in order. So you need to start with book 1 in Civil Corruption, which is just called Corrupt. Okay, so now I read a physical book. So I read this one, which is Yours Until Dawn by Teresa Medeiros, and it was one of the books that I got from my book haul in January, and I'll link that video down below. I got this at the recommendation of Jen from the Book Refuge, who really recommended this one, and I was drawn to this one because it was a Beauty and the Beast retelling. So in this one we follow Gabriel and Samantha. Now Gabriel has, he's been in the Navy, and during a battle he is injured and he loses his sight. And he is now home, and he's living in one of the country estates that his family owns, and he is roaming around that property like he is the Beast from Beauty and the Beast. He's extremely bitter and angry about what's happened to him, and he kind of brings the household down with him. So all the drapes are drawn, it's very, very dark, everything's musty, but he's not really trying to do anything about learning to live with his disability, and he just stomps around the house, bumping into things and getting angrier and angrier. Now his family have hired a variety of nurses to try and look after him, take care of him, but basically he's so mean to all of them that they've all kind of like given up their jobs and left. And that's where we meet our heroine Samantha, and she is his new nurse, and she's determined to help him and live with his disability, and he is determined to push her away. Again, it's a very interesting dynamic, very similar to Beauty and the Beast, where he tries to be horrible to her and push her away, but she's quite strong and stands up to him and kind of makes him confront some of his you know, some of his demons, and tries to make him come to terms with kind of what's happened to him. Now, I had really high expectations for this book. I was really wanting to love it, and I did love it up to kind of like the 3rd act conflict and what happened and how it was dealt with. But I was just very underwhelmed by the ending of this book. It didn't have kind of like the wow factor or the grovel that I was expecting, and I think the hero made some choices which, if I'd have been the heroine, I would have been upset by. And I understand why she wasn't upset by them, but I just felt it was quite lacklustre and not quite what I was expecting. So I did rate this book 4 stars, but again, if I was given half stars, it would probably been about 3.5. So I was underwhelmed and a bit disappointed by the ending, unfortunately. So the next book I read was Rewriting You by Emilia Finn, and this is book 4 in the Survivor series. Now this is the 2nd series she's ever written, and is set in the same universe as the 1st series, which is the Rolling On series. Now I discovered Emilia Finn because I read Pawns in the Bishop's Game, which I read thinking it was a mafia romance, and it was my favourite book of 2021. I cannot stop talking about it, cannot stop thinking about it. In fact, I loved the book so much that as soon as I finished it the first time round, I started again from the beginning. I've got a physical copy of the book and it is a signed copy from Emilia Finn. I absolutely love it. I love the hero and I love the storyline. Now that was the first book in series 3 that she's written, and it's also sort of set in the same town as her first 2 series. So because I'm a bit of a completionist and I didn't want to kind of like skip ahead, there were some characters in that series that I knew I was going to encounter that we kind of seen in previous series. So I went back to the beginning. Now the Rolling On series is absolutely brilliant. Loved all of those. And then I got into the Survivor series. Now I'll say overall that it's a much weaker series. It's much weaker than the first book from series 3, and I haven't read the rest of that series, so I don't know how it compares. Like, it might be just one standout book. But compared to the first series that she wrote, I feel very much that all the books that I've read so far in the Survivor series have been a little bit lacklustre. And for me, the Survivor series just is lacking something, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but it's just not hitting me as hard as the other books I've read by her. Now this particular one was slightly stronger in the series and I did rate it 4 stars, and we are following Oz and Lindsay. So Oz is a police officer and he's the partner from the hero from book 1, and we've seen him in like I say, we've seen him in the other series as well. And Lindsay is also someone that we saw in the Rolling On series, and she is related through her children to the Rollers. Basically, Lindsay had a very abusive husband, and who attempted to kill her. And in the first series, the husband was sort of like, you know, played quite a key role in the overall plot, and ended up being killed. So Lindsay actually ends up in self-defense killing her husband. Oz is there on the night it happened because he's a police officer, and basically he kind of takes her to the hospital and makes sure she's all right. And in order to like start fresh, she disappears. Now her ex-husband's brother is now in trouble and he is going to court, and so she comes back as a character witness to help put him into prison. So she's kind of back in town after, you know, being away for a number of years, and so she kind of like then bumps into Oz, and obviously she recognises him from before, and he is very much, you know, and they're very much attracted to each other, and gently they basically start a relationship. I really like this one because Lindsay has 2 children, and the daughter is so young that she doesn't remember father what happened, but her son is slightly older, and he was there the night that his father tried to kill his mum, and she ended up killing him in self-defense. And so he is extremely troubled teenager. He's very possessive of his mother, like protective I should say. He's very protective over his mother, but he's also giving her a hard time. He's going out late at night, he's running with the wrong crowds, he's you know, drinking alcohol in the street, and Oz kind of takes him under his wing and kind of like does this kind of almost like big brother little brother sort of program with him. I really like that aspect. I mean, it was so nice to go back to the world where the Rollers were. We get to see some of the characters that we've loved from previous books. Again, like I say, it's not as strong this series as the other series, but I still enjoy this book, and I think it's probably one of the stronger books in the series, the Survivor series, that I've read so far. All I would say on this one, it was really good. I rated it 4 stars, and I would highly recommend, but you do, I think, you're best reading them all in order to get the full impact, because all of the characters, like I say, you see in the other books, and you kind of like get to know them a little bit better in the other books, and it's really nice when you see the characters coming back. So then after that, I fancied a bit of a change, and I thought I was going to go into an MC romance, and so Birdie's Biker by Misty Walker had been on my TBR for a long time, and I thought it's time, I'm going to give it a go. So this is an age gap, it's a bit of a protector romance, and I rated this one 4 stars. I really liked it. So in this one we're following Bridget, who's known as Birdie, and Loki. Now, so Loki is the leader of the Royal Bastards MC, and they take on jobs for people in order to earn cash. And basically this is where we meet Bridget, or Birdie as she becomes known, because her father is extremely rich, and he has made his fortune selling drugs to pharmaceutical companies, and he's been working on a cure for cancer, and he's come across basically a virus that is so deadly that the moment you're exposed to it you will die, and so it's almost like a biological weapon. Now, it's illegal for him to have this and he should destroy it, but there's a vial that's kind of like loose that hasn't been destroyed, and it's now in the hands of the local mafia. The mafia come and take it from him and beat him up and blackmail him, and they want some cash from him in exchange for this, this vial. And they threaten his daughter, Bridget. Now, he then employs the local MC to get the vial back, so basically burgle the vial back and protect his daughter while this is all happening. So Birdie goes to stay with the bikers. Now, she's not too happy to be there, and she causes a few issues and tries to escape, and as a result Loki locks her in a massive dog cage and doesn't let her out, because he's like, you're safer in there. I know, you're basically being a brat. If you want to be a brat, that's fine, but I'm going to cage you in this cage so you can't run away from me and escape, and I know exactly where you are. And he basically tries to subdue her like this. Now, I've read MC books before and I absolutely loved dark romance, and I don't know why I was so surprised, but I was surprised by how dark and violent this book actually was. So there's moments of sort of lightness and normalness, and there's all the different characters in the MC, and you can really see how they're kind of build, like Misty Walker is building this whole series, and you kind of get to know some of the other characters. So there's kind of like a found family kind of like vibe about it. They're all kind of brothers, they all kind of get on, they're kind of like really relaxed, kicking back, having fun. And then there's these moments of like violence and darkness, which you kind of like should expect with a dark romance or in an MC romance, but I was almost shocked by them when they were sort of placed in there. So the opening sequence for this book is Loki cutting someone's eyes out, and while I've sort of those sorts of scenes don't bother me, it was kind of like I was a bit taken aback by it, if I'm honest, and I was a little bit shocked. And then later on, when Loki and Birdie develop a relationship, and she starts to explore her sexuality, and because of what happens to her throughout the book, she develops a kink for being kept in a cage like a pet. And so it's really, really interesting, because like on the one side of it, it seems fairly kind of like sort of normal, and everyone's, like I say, everyone's having fun and being friends, and then you've got these moments of very dark sort of scenes were brilliant. Like, I thoroughly enjoyed it. This was a solid 4-star read. I really enjoyed it, but also quite shocking in places. Anyway, I loved it so much. Obviously it didn't upset me, because I loved it so much I went on to read the next one in the series, which is Truly's Biker, and this is another age gap. There's also an unplanned pregnancy in here. The hero is very damaged. And he's also the father's best friend. So there's kind of lots of tropes and like taboo elements about this one. But again, I absolutely loved it, gave it 4 stars. And in this one, we're following Truly and Roach. And we saw Roach in book 1, and he's the quiet one. He doesn't talk very much at all. And he lives at the back of the sort of the clubhouse in his own like accommodation area. And he also rescues dogs. So he's got one really cute Chihuahua called Karen, I think her name was, if I'm remembering it correctly, and then about 15 other dogs. And he rescues like pit bulls that have been mistreated in dog fighting, and he's kind of rescued them, and now they're completely devoted to him, and they're really sweet dogs, and he's looking after them. But one of the reasons he's so quiet, and he doesn't really like to socialise. He's a bit different from the other bikers because he doesn't really drink alcohol. He certainly doesn't sleep with a lot of women, and it's because he's got quite a dark backstory. So before he joined the MC, he was in the army and he was away in Afghanistan, and he had a friend, and unfortunately his friend and himself were captured and by the enemy, and then they were basically captured and tortured. Now he was trying to rescue his friend, but unfortunately his friend is beheaded in a horrific publicised beheading, and he is extremely traumatised by everything that he's been through. And when he finally kind of escapes and he comes back to America, he finds it very, very difficult to reintegrate back into society, and eventually he kind of joins the MC club because, you know, he needs a place where he feels safe and where he's found family, but he can also use his sort of like skills that he used in the army for, you know, I wouldn't say for good, because he's certainly not using them for good, but, you know, he's making use of his skills. And when he comes back from the army, before his friend died, he wrote a letter to his family, to his wife and his daughter, and so he delivers this letter to the wife, who is Ayana, I think her name was, and to Truly. Now when he first meets Truly is 8 years old, but she instantly takes a shine to Roach, and she, you know, holds his hand and chatters to him non-stop, and she kind of makes it her mission to see Roach smile. So over the years, been keeping in touch with the wife, looking after and kind of like watching over Truly, and now Truly is 18. Now she's very much had a crush on Roach ever since she's known him, and now she's 18, she has decided that she's in love with him and she wants to get his attention, and she does that by acting out and running off, and then her mother will call Roach and say she's disappeared again, and he'll have to go off and rescue her and bring her back. So she kind of like does like these very dangerous things in order to kind of get his attention, because she's hoping that he'll see her as a woman now that she's of age and that they can be together. But of course he, you know, he doesn't think about her like that to start off with, and even if he did, he, you know, he knows he's not good enough for her, he's not the man for her, and also he's quite a lot older than her, and so at first it's not even something that he can comprehend or think about, that she would even find him attractive in the first place. But of course she gets herself into trouble with the wrong people, and you know, he has to come to her aid and rescue her, and over the course of like the plot unraveling and everything that goes on, they obviously develop a relationship. So again, I really liked this one. It is, you know, I love a damaged hero. I just thought it was really great. And then I picked up the third one in that series, Bexley's Biker, and in this one we follow Bexley, who is the MC's lawyer, who they pay on retainer in case they get into trouble, and Khan, who is the VP of the club. So he's best friends to Loki from book 1, and he's the VP. Now in book 2, in Truly's Biker, we see that Khan is arrested for stealing a van and blowing up a warehouse, and this has been caught on film, and so the prosecutors are in possession of this film, and that's how they're going to put him away. Now at first he doesn't make bail, so he's kind of stuck in prison for a couple of months, but eventually Bexley, the lawyer, gets him out on bail. But he's had a massive crush on Bexley for a long time, but she is not having any of it. You know, he's always trying to flirt with her and to make her notice him, but she pretty much pushes him back, and she's quite surly and mean. So it's kind of a reverse Grumpy Sunshine, because he's a sunshine and she's very much the grump, and she's not having any of it. And so he's constantly trying to, you know, flirt with her and get her to go out with him, and it's really quite sweet from that respect. But of course Bexley is hiding a secret. She was previously married to a judge, but he was very abusive towards her, to the point where she ended up having to run away. But before she ran away, she stole a lot of money from him so that she could start a new life. And she's found herself in the same town as these bikers, and, you know, later became a lawyer. Now her judge husband has finally tracked her down and he's back to get revenge, and who should be the judge presiding over Khan's case but the husband. Khan finds out about this. He doesn't care about his own case or what's happening. He just very much wants to protect her. So overall, I really like this book and I gave it 4 stars. But I do have one criticism of this book, and that I thought the third act conflict was a little bit weak. So essentially, Bexley breaks up with Khan and says that she doesn't love him and doesn't want to be with him anymore. And I think her rationale and reason for doing this is pretty weak, if I'm honest. But Khan kind of believes her story and thinks that she's betrayed him. And then when they kind of like resolve it and they get the happy ever after at the end, I didn't think it was done in a very realistic way based on kind of what happened. I don't think there was very much of a grovel or an explanation. Like, I think some of the plot, some of the rationale here was a little bit glossed over for me. And while you, as a reader, you could put 2 and 2 together, you kind of knew what was going on. As a couple, they never had the conversation between themselves. So she never explained herself, or and you were kind of left to kind of read between the lines. And so, like I say, if anything, that would be my only criticism of the book. But overall, I did really enjoy it and would highly recommend. And the last book that I read in February was this one, which was The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie by Jennifer Ashley. And it was also one of the books that I picked up in my haul for January. Now, I was really looking forward to this book and I did really enjoy it. It was almost a 5-star read, but did not quite make it, and I'll explain why. But in this one, obviously we're following Lord Ian Mackenzie, and the heroine in this one is Beth. Now, there are 4 Mackenzie brothers all together, and the eldest brother is a duke, and a very, very influential duke, and they own a massive plot of land in Scotland. And this one starts with Ian, who's the younger brother. He's definitely on the autistic spectrum, and as a result, people think that he's mad. So his backstory is that his father was very violent. He witnessed something he shouldn't have when he was a child, and he was put into a mental asylum, in part because he was a little bit odd, but also in part because his father was trying to keep him quiet for what he'd witnessed. Now, when his father passes away, his elder brother, the now Duke, he immediately gets him out of the mental asylum, where Ian has been very, very poorly treated. And obviously at the time they would do things like, you know, put him in ice cold baths, give him electric shock treatment and some beatings to try and beat the madness out of him, if you like. So he's not had a particularly good experience growing up. But now he's under the kind of the care and direction of his brother. Now he's extremely gifted and talented, and he's got a photographic memory. He remembers everything that he sees and reads and hears. And his brother uses that in his business because he'll get Ian to basically read all the contracts and things and remember everything that's been said, and really help him with the business side of things. But Ian has also got quite an obsessive compulsive kind of personality, and he loves pottery and collecting, in particular Ming bowls. So this book starts where Ian has gone to buy a Ming bowl from another upper class gentleman, and this gentleman is bragging that he is betrothed to marry a lady called Beth. Now Beth has recently come into a lot of money, so she's basically from the lower classes in society, but she was an elderly lady's like companion, and when this lady died she inherited her wealth, and so now she's a very wealthy lady, and this gentleman who is running short of funds is now going to marry her, and he's bragging to Ian about it. And Ian wonders if she's a genuine, like the Ming bowl, or maybe she's a fake, like some of the other bowls this gentleman owns, because he can't distinguish between the fake ones and the real ones. And so that night he goes to the opera and he meets Beth for the first time, and he decides that she's very much the real deal, and he kind of sets his sights on her for himself. And basically he decides that he's going to split them up by basically telling Beth that her fiance is not a great man. He's got some strange sexual appetites, and maybe he's also after her for her money. Now she investigates this and realises what Ian's told her is true, and she breaks off the engagement. And Ian offers to marry her instead, but she decides that she's done with marriage and the idea of marriage, and she decides she's going to go off to Paris to find herself. And so then we move to Paris. Now in Paris she meets Lady Isabella, who happens to be the estranged wife of another one of the Mackenzie brothers, and also that goes on, and she's the heroine of book 2 in this series. She forms a friendship basically with Isabella when she moves into her house in Paris. And then Ian arrives with a couple of his brothers and you know, tries to again win her over. What I loved about this book is the plot was so rich. Ian's character was so well written. He's such an interesting and deep sort of character. He's got a lot of issues, but he's also brilliant, and he is, you know, massively attracted and in love with Beth. So he's very obsessed by her and wants to be with her. But alongside this is a plot line of like a bit of a murder mystery. So basically some women have been murdered. People think that Ian has done it. The evidence is circumstantial, but you know, it's leaning towards Ian might have done it. And there's actually a point where Ian isn't even sure whether he did do it or not, because he can't, sometimes he goes into these sort of like fits or rages, or has sort of like, you know, episodes if you like, where maybe he can't remember what's happened. So he starts to question whether or not he did do it. But also he has a suspicion that his brother might be involved. And so Beth picks up on this and decides that she's going to try and find out who the murderer is, and therefore clear Ian's name. But in doing so, she kind of gets herself obviously into trouble, because the murderer is not too happy that she's snooping around. So I thought this was wonderfully rich story. The romance was great. The characters were fantastic. It really whet my appetite to see what's going to happen with Isabella in the second book and the brother Mac. And yeah, I just love the relationship between them. I guess the reason I didn't give it 5 stars and it didn't quite tip over to 5 stars for me was because I didn't 100% feel the passion and connection between them that I wanted to feel. But there wasn't like this massive grand gesture or big finale at the end, and I didn't really like get this overwhelming sense of like love and passion, which is what I want to feel when I give a book a 5 star. So it was absolutely brilliant. Would highly recommend. One of my favourite historicals that I've read to date, but didn't quite make it to a 5 star read for me. So there we have it. That's all the 15 books that I read in February. Thank you very much for watching, and if you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me to the end. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up, and remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content from me. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye. A bit like Yours Until Dawn. It was almost a 5 star, but didn't quite get there. No, it wasn't almost like Yours Until Dawn. I don't think that was ever going to be a 5 star. Right. How rude, the battery just ran out on me. How very dare it. So I'm hoping that she'll, you know, that'll give her a, anyway, that should be fine. Because he's going to be able to, you know, he's going to be able to, what's the word, wiggle it in your face. He's going to be able to. But basically it's part of the Temple Maze series, and there is this maze which is kind of, it's really hard to describe.